Truth Frequency Radio Network. KTFRN. Worldwide.
Hola, this is Sienna inviting you to join me tonight as we navigate through the seen and the unseen, explore external and internal realities, expose on-world and off-world agendas, discover a path to joy and freedom. Now, join me as we illuminate the Shadowland and reclaim our birthright as free and sovereign beings. Good evening, everyone. This is Sienna, and you are listening to Truth Frequency Radio Network, Illuminating the Shadowland, Episode 22, Community Planet with Jack Reed. Jack is the founder of Community Planet, a sustainable community project like no other. Jack believes that it actually has the potential to transform our planet and our lives on all levels. Good evening, Jack.
Good evening, Sienna.
It's wonderful to have you on Illuminating the Shadowland tonight. Jack, you state that because everything is interconnected, the age-old approach of trying to change all the imbalances and crises our planet faces by addressing them one at a time hasn't been working and cannot work. We must step outside the box to see the big picture, that the ultimate solution to all these challenges is the same solution: evolution into sustainable communities. Wow. So how do you see this taking place, Jack? Maybe we should start right with your incredible work, the book that you've written. And the title of the book, Jack, is Evolution? Yeah.
The Next Evolution, a Blueprint for Transforming the Planet.
Okay. All right. So maybe we should start where the book begins, with a brief look at where you see we are in terms of the world, the economic situation, the unsustainability. Anything you wish to express that lays out the problem as you see it?
Well, when I do my presentations in the PowerPoints, I just simply put up one slide that says the political system is broken, and the next slide says the economic system is broken, and anybody who's paying attention to anything knows that these systems are broken beyond repair, and they simply need to be replaced by creating something that works for everyone. The way the systems are set up right now, it's set up in what we call the every person for themselves paradigm that's been unquestioned for thousands of years, and it's basically people who are in power and in control of what's going on, is they've made this work for them, and we see that reflected in all over the world, particularly in this country, where the statistics show that the 1% in the past few decades has been getting an ever greater share of the wealth, and for the rest of us, that our lifestyles have been declining based on what they were, say, back in the 50s and 60s. So this is something that's well known by everyone. And if a conscious group of people got together and thought about, well, how can we really create a world that works for everyone, they would come up with a solution probably very similar to what we came up with. We had a group of people that met together for 3 years, and it was exactly for that reason, to design something where we could create something that would work for everybody on the planet so that everybody could live a very abundant lifestyle. And that is the one thing that we see that could change everything else.
Wow. Yeah, well, I am a great proponent of community. It's really in my heart. I went to Tamara. I lived there. I've been in various communities, and I'm very aware that there is a huge impulse planet-wide to move in this direction, whether we do it out of choice or out of necessity as as things break down. But it's also probably one of the most challenging things for human beings to be able to live in that kind of way. And so it's really fascinating to me that you actually engaged in this sort of think tank. And I know that you also lived in community for a number of years, is working things out and looking at how things break down and how things can be reconfigured.
Yes, that's right. I lived in a spiritual community just west of downtown Los Angeles for about 15 years. So
you were up close and personal about what works and what doesn't.
Exactly. I was going to say what works and what doesn't.
Yes. So what kind of revolution do you feel we need right now in that community is a solution for it? I mean, you talked about this situation where we're all out for ourselves, basically. And maybe you want to dive a little further into that, because maybe, we don't really recognize that everything is designed on that basis. I know that you've broken this down with a really very in-depth understanding. So is absolutely everything that we're about based on, because, our Christian values and our cultural values all say that we're working for the good of the whole, and we get preached this in our schools, in our churches, all through our lives. So you're saying that this isn't the case at all, that there's a whole other ideology that we're operating out of that is creating the dysfunction?
Yeah, I think there have been very few cultures in the world, though there have been some that were just based on people trying to survive on their own and families trying to survive on their own, and the whether it's a capitalistic, socialistic, communistic, fascist system, it's all pretty much the same. I have a saying about that, and that those systems are all fundamentally more alike than they are different, because they're all based on centralized power-based systems, whereas what we're proposing is something where the decision-making is returned to the people at the local level. So it's very fundamentally different. And what the world needs to see is they need to see that model of a cooperative community that would serve as a model that could be replicated all over the planet. There are so many intentional and eco-communities that are starting all over the planet, and many have been existing for a long time. But what we need to do is to create one on the scale that will really get people's awareness that these things are happening and that they can be replicated all over the planet. So that's what's different about about our project, Community Planet, and another project that I know of that's called One Community, is that we intend to create communities as a model that can be replicated all over the planet. When I talk about the every person for themselves system, it's basically, it's incredibly inefficient. I have to laugh about this because it's just, we're all like sort of in a state of hypnosis that we think this is the way it has to be because this is the way it's always been. To say that we can't do something because there's not enough money is ludicrous, because money in and of itself cannot do anything. It's just a medium of exchange. It's a medium of cooperation, if you will. To say we can't save lives, we can't protect the environment, we can't provide people the health care that they need because there's not enough money is absurd. Buckminster Fuller once did a study that showed that 85% of the jobs that exist only exist because of the lack of cooperation between people. So this whole political argument about what we need to create jobs is actually nonsense. We actually need fewer jobs because those jobs are using up the world's resources. To say we need more energy, if we just eliminated those 85% of the jobs and put those people and had people do something else to restore the environment, to have more time for their lives to communicate with themselves, with each other, with nature, we could live far more abundant lives. And the kind of nonsense products that people and services that people create just to try and survive on their own, you can imagine, you've seen all your life all these nonsense products that people.
Yeah, absolutely.
They're trying to think like, well, how can I make a living? Well, I'll create this thing that nobody needs but people want to buy. And then all those things end up in landfills, and then we've got landfill problems. Whereas if people were living in communities where they had more time, where they were pedestrian communities, where they could live and work in the same community, where they could basically walk everywhere, where all the recreation would be available, the food is available, it's all no cost, no money system within the community, health care is all available. It would be transformational, and people could be so much happier and having so much fun in their lives. And when people see this model in operation, that's the thing that can basically transform the planet. I love to do question and answers where people come up with problems and they say, well, what about this? And I can show how this community solution would basically address almost any challenge to the world that anybody can come up with.
Okay, well, let's come up with some good questions for you, because I can feel into the collective mind, too. And we just do have this belief that as bad as it is, we have to save it, we have to make it better, we have to elect better officials. There's a safety, there's patterns in psychology where people become addicted to their abusers, and they will do anything to keep with their abusers no matter what is happening to them. And it almost feels like, talking to you tonight, that we have a collective psychosis that we have to hold this dying, punishing, isolating, separating, enslaving system to us at all costs. There's this deep, deep fear because we've been suckling on that breast for a very, very long time, and we're sick from it, but it's all that we know. So it's really refreshing to hear somebody that's so impassioned about absolutely knowing that there's another way. It's very I feel very heartfelt appreciation for you because I know you've been holding this for a long time, pushing through the fabric of the artificial construct to make this happen. And I know that is not an easy task, and that a lot of visionaries get beat down because there's always that, but you can't do it. So let's throw some questions. We don't have open phone lines tonight, but I can envision some of those. You can probably envision some of those questions too, like, well, what do you mean we could all have health care? Where's the money going to come for all of this? Let's dive down into the structure as you see it a bit more, perhaps.
One example of that is on the island of Kauai. There was I think a bridge that was out that went up into what's called the Grand Canyon of the Pacific, which is, I can't remember the name of that canyon, but the locals were losing a lot of money from tourist money that would come through there, and the government was they didn't have money set aside for this, and they were going to take, it would take like a year or so to get this thing done. And the locals just decided, well, if they're not going to do it, we'll do it. And they just all banded together. And within a couple of weeks, they had their bridge, and everything was back into operation. And that's just, people came together and they did things together. We see pictures of people in impoverished areas where there's just people sitting out on the porches, for instance, because they don't have work. But if those people really got together in their consciousness and they brainstormed and they had cooperation, people could get together and do some amazing things if they, and this is a term that we use over and over again when we're describing our project, both for One Community and Community Planet, is we base our systems on the highest good for all concerned. And people operating with that consciousness. So part of what we're talking about also is not only having the form based on the highest good for all, rather than the every person for themselves paradigm, but also that the people who become resonants in these communities, it's going to be prerequisite that they also hold that consciousness. That they be screened for, in fact, to become resonants, that they have the maturity to do consensus decision-making, because we designed a way for the entire community of 500 people to use consensus decision-making where it's not based on elected officials, but everybody in the community has the ability, not only the ability, but the power to make decisions that affect their everyday lives. We're not talking about what color to paint the community room, but, because not all decisions have to be made by consensus. But the essential decisions, everybody can be in on this, but there are communities that exist that say, well, we tried consensus, but it didn't work. And I'd say two questions. I said, did you train the people? Did you screen the people? And they say no and no. And I said, well, then don't try to use consensus unless you have trained and screened the people. But that's going to be...
Okay.
Thanks.
Hang on here. Hang on. There's a lot of meat in that last bit. And we have the time to break this down because... so what you're saying is that for a community to work in the paradigm, what you're saying is that they have to function working for the highest good of all. They have to function out of a higher set of values and integrity. And it's interesting. It's, what comes first, the chicken or the egg? Because at Tamara, they would say that the community itself would be the therapeutic organ to allow people to really step into that understanding, because there would be so much nurturing, there'd be so much fun, the needs of the people would be getting met. They wouldn't be so fear-based, they wouldn't have to be so guarded, and they wouldn't be fighting each other, like you say, everybody out for themselves. And the field that's created when people have a higher value actually heals them to be able to go on to manifest it. So I could envision that there would be ongoing process-oriented work amidst all the activities of the community, because we're all wounded in that way. People are heavily guarded, and egos are inflamed, and wounds are very deep. So, but I have great belief, actually, in that it is when we're in an environment that welcomes us, that really is looking out for us. We don't even know what that is. That a different level of openness and vulnerability and the true essence of human heart can really be sustainable, because it seems to me in our culture, we give lip service to all those values, but we're really in an exceedingly hostile environment. And this is crazy making, and it keeps us really in a position where we keep harming ourselves and each other. And so it's quite a complex situation in that way. Yeah.
I would agree with Tamara's approach on this. The way we would put that into operation is that in terms there would be residents of the community who hold that consciousness, have the maturity to do consensus decision making. We could also have visitors. We could have people who come in as interns, because that's one of the things that's going to happen is people are going to have to heal some of those parts of themselves to have the maturity of consciousness to be able to function cooperatively in these communities. So they're going to have to see that. They're going to have to be nurtured in the kind of environment that Tamara has establishes for people. So, yeah, I would completely agree with that.
I'd like to talk a little bit about the designs of our towns and cities as they are now. Just to have a look at how much the fear and the need to stay isolated, the alienation is built into the very structure of what we call communities at this time. I know you talk about that in the first part of your book, our current conditions.
Yes, as opposed to being designed with the highest good of all the people in the community in mind, most of the time communities are set up by, historically by, somebody comes in and they put up a house, and then there's another couple of houses, and then maybe some businesses, and things kind of get added without the global picture involved, and we end up with communities that look like they are now. And sometimes they've built planned communities too, but they're generally built on people, on selling lots and houses for people to individually, still individually survive on their own. And what we're talking about here is that instead of owning a lot and a home, people would collectively own the entire community. There would be no fences and no property lines. It would be all one property. That property would be held by the entire community. So it's like, I own a community. I don't just own a house. I own a community, and basically everything in it. So people become partnered, and that idea of some people having more and some people having less, and doing that whole comparative kind of thing, I think, maybe that's all Piscean age stuff, and we're moving into the age of Aquarius. I think we have to move into cooperation, and not only cooperation for all the human lives on the planet, but cooperation for all life on the planet, because human activity has so adversely affected flora and fauna all over the planet, and we simply need to do something different if we're going to recreate the paradise that once was, and to be able to live in harmony with all life.
So you hear quite often people saying, I need my own space. And, when you look in the suburbs around a lot of the major cities, they're like rows of little castles. People have, And
I call those, incidentally, when I look at them sometimes when I go hiking up in the hills and I see some of those mansions that you talk about, and I look at them and it's like, oh, those are hide-and-go-seek houses where the people inside can basically go and hide for weeks and not be found. The amount of square footage per person in the United States, something like, I don't know what it's doing now after this 2008 economic downturn, but But before then, the amount of square footage per person had quadrupled since the 50s. And, that's just incredibly wasteful. It's interesting that the people who did the co-housing book, I can't remember their names, but I heard them speak once, and they basically visited co-housing projects all over the planet. And when they went back and talked to the people about what they would do differently if they had it all to do over again in terms of the design, they all said something very surprising to the authors. They said they would design less personal space and more common space.
Absolutely.
We've just got, what do we need our personal space for? In a community that is designed to be in harmony with nature, there would be all kinds of spaces where people could go and not just be on concrete to be by themselves or in an enclosed. They could go out in nature and have communion places in nature by themselves. And the kind of, Barbara Marx Hubbard, who's a futurist who lives here in Santa Barbara, she, in the book, I described two of the major problems on the planet as being isolation and alienation.
We're going to break right now. We'll get back with Barbara and what she said right after the break. Thank you so much. This is Sienna Leah. I'm here with Jack Reed of Community Planet on Illuminating the Shadowland. We'll be right back. Welcome back, everyone. This is Sienna Leah, and I'm here with Jack Reed of Community Planet. Jack, you were just telling us about Barbara.
Yes. She said that, Barbara Marx Hubbard, she said that the biggest problem on the planet is separation. And when I heard that, it was like, yeah, that's exactly right. I was trying to describe that in two words, alienation and isolation. But yeah, the idea that we're separate, and that separation is, people get separated within themselves, and you know that from the work with the Shadowlands. That's the first arena of separation is people separated from themselves. And I know about that, having grown up in a family that was not expressing feelings. If somebody had said, well, how do you feel about that? Our honest answer would have been like, well, we don't speak that language.
Yeah.
And it took years of dealing with that to make that connection within myself. But then people feel separation from other people. People feel separated and separate themselves from nature in terms of what we do to nature. So separation in all those aspects is, I think, the major problem, because I have a friend who's had 4 near-death experiences where he's died 4 times and gone to the other side. But in terms of his experience, that trip on the other side was just one trip. Each time he said it was like going out the door and then coming right back in for him to resume what he was being shown and told. And they told him there were 5 laws that governed how the universe worked. And they said, if you get this first one, then you really don't need to get anything else, because everything is contained in this first law. And that first law was that everything is one thing. So separation is that illusion. So to think that I have to win and only by having other people lose, and I have to have more than somebody else. I mean, this is that separation issue that's gotten all of us and the world in trouble over time. So let's just make it work for everybody, because in making it work for everybody, we can all have so much more. And sure, a millionaire might not be able to have like 5 yachts, and 10 houses all over the world, but everybody can. When we have these communities eventually worldwide, anybody can go anywhere and travel by just seeing which communities they can go and visit and live in, and they don't have to pack a bunch of stuff. And if they want to move from one place to another, I mean, everything they need is going to be at this new place, so people can have an amazing amount of mobility to be able to enjoy the world, and only a fraction of the people in the world can enjoy the world right now. I'd say most of the people never get within 100 miles of where they grow up, because we're used to thinking of this just in terms of the Western world and the kind of access to wealth that we've had, but a lot of the world doesn't have access to that. And I've been concerned ever since I can remember, not just about what we experience here, but what's happening all over the world. And the people who are dying every day from starvation, and the amount of people living in poverty and without much. And we can simply create this network of communities all over the planet and have everybody live very abundantly.
Well, it's so true now that families don't even live together in the Western world a lot. I mean, I'm here in Ecuador, and family is very important here, and there's lots of community activity here, although they have lots of other problems. But certainly in the Western world, you don't see what you see down here with girls holding hands, boys with their arms around each other. They're not gay, they're just friends. Or the family will go out and you'll see the little baby to the oldest grandma and everybody in between, and they all go out for meals, and they all walk and they have their ice cream in the square at night, and they enjoy each other's company. I mean, it would be like so uncool for most teenagers to even be seen in the proximity of their parents on the street in America. And everyone's got their noses in these iPads and the iPhones and the video games and all of the archonic technology, and the level of isolation and mind numbness and trance that I'm experiencing in the States now is unbelievable. So would your community model bring people back into a sense of relationship? What would you do, for example, with the old people?
Well, this is another interesting thing, too, when people say, well, how would you care for the old people and what would they do? And in the community, everybody would have something to do, as I just described in the book, from the vision that the Community Planet group put together, that everybody would be involved in one of the 12 areas that go to make up how the community operates. And
what are the 12 areas? Are you going to go into that? Because I'd really like to hear what the areas are that you have it broken down into as well.
Yeah, well, we can get into that.
Excuse me.
But if somebody was, for instance, on Fridays, I go to see a friend of mine, a mother of some friends of mine, but she's been a friend too. She's now 94 years old. She has Alzheimer's. And every time I go in, I ask her, do you remember who I am? She never remembers, but I get her to laugh, and I spend some time with her, and if that would be her job in the community, would be to be the person to be taken care of, and other people's jobs would be the people who take care of people who are in that situation. But also that would be much less of an occurrence where people have access to to health care all through their lives and can make some better choices about in terms of health-wise in their lives, so there'll be far less occurrence of those kinds of things. But, you know, in the community, everybody will have something that they can contribute.
And so the old ones and the young ones and the different, they won't be isolated in nursing homes, left to die and this sort of thing.
Oh, yeah. Well, that's one of my pet peeves, because I used to work for the Department of Rehabilitation in California here, and to see, and I placed a lot of people, because I worked with some of the people with learning disabilities, and I placed people in nursing homes, and so I saw a lot of nursing homes, and I thought, you know, what are we doing as a society where we place people in these kind of places? We're just basically putting them there to die, where people sit in wheelchairs and in the hallways, and it's crazy. But
yeah, very inhumane.
We just do better than that.
Getting some feedback now on your mic. I don't know if you need to turn down your speakers or how you're operating there. Just a little bit.
Okay, well, let me try this. How are we doing now?
Yeah, that's way better. Thank you, Jack.
Okay.
Yeah, I love the model that you're describing. It feels so much more humane. I mean, I can see the animals and the children and the people valuing their organic connection to life and to their hearts and to what they can create for one another, and what they can make that is part of our true nature, and that I really do believe that it is in these communities of the future where we're going to recover from this archontic world that we've been placed in. But it's certainly going to be a transition out of this hierarchy, this hierarchical dominator control model. So I'm very interested in knowing how you train people, because you do train people in facilitation. And one of the interesting things I heard in one of your talks, you talked about going to some very sophisticated group of people with your, I believe, consensus training, and what you found there, that they weren't terribly good at it initially. Do you remember that story? I love that.
Yeah, it was actually a team building program, because I've done team building in my life, and these were basically the kind of geniuses from BMW worldwide, and they had their people come to various places around the world. In this case, it happened to be in the Los Angeles area, and expose them to a lot of different things. And one of the things was to have a team building day with our group. So the person, I was one of the facilitators, and the person was the leader, who said, we'll have to really challenge these people because of their level of mental functioning. And when I heard that, I thought, yeah, I wonder about that. And so when I was working with them, when all the facilitators were working with them, they were probably just not quite as good as the average group, because, you know, it's one thing to be a genius. It's a whole other thing to have communication skills and to work effectively in groups. I observe that people, when they're working in groups, kind of go into a group behavior where they let somebody who's the most vocal usually takes the leadership position. And it's not necessarily the people who've got the ideas that'll work. They may keep those ideas to themselves if they don't know how to work effectively within a group, and if the group doesn't create the atmosphere for those ideas to be heard.
Exactly. It just
the
hierarchy just recreates itself.
Yeah. When I facilitate consensus decision making, what's different about our consensus trainings is that we don't so much focus on the techniques about, when to block, when to stand aside, when to use straw voting. We focus on the consciousness that it takes to do this because when, in our observation, when people are having trouble reaching consensus, it's almost always the same issue that's involved, is that there's an underlying safety factor operating somewhere in the group where somebody or one or more people just do not feel safe in the group at that point. And it's that issue that needs to be addressed, not the issue before them that they're trying to resolve through consensus decision making, but it's let's look at the safety issues and see what's going on there. I was working with one group and they were pretty stuck for a couple of hours, and then we called for a safety check, and we found that almost everybody in the group had some safety issue that was going on, and we gave them some time to talk about that, and it was remarkable that the things that can happen in a group, it was almost everybody had something that was unconscious to them that was going on that was blocking their ability to do consensus. But when given a chance and the group support to go inside and explore that with the support and the loving of the group, people were able to clear some amazing things. And after they spent about 2 hours doing that for the decision, it was the main decision that they needed to make. But after that point, everybody in the group came into consensus within 5 minutes, because the issue they were trying to decide on, they were all basically there if they could clear what was happening inside them.
Amen to that one. Absolutely. And this is not the way normal society functions. I mean, can you imagine if the political bodies, of course, there are so many layers of deception and manipulation there that by the time they get there, they're so contracted to forces of that have the big money interest and the lobbyists and all of that. But this has to be a part of anything that's sane, that brings people together, and it's so true. We're often trying to make these big decisions and implement big dreams, and it cannot work if we're all still in this paranoid retreat space where we just can't trust each other. And it isn't paranoid, because the paranoid implies that there's no good reason for it. There's plenty of good reason that we are all this way. Yeah, I love that.
Yeah, and the whole political system, at least in Washington, is based on, it's based on who's got the money, who's got the power, the lobbyists that are there. There's how many lobbyists are there for every member of Congress, and a lot of those lobbyists are people who have been in Congress before, and then they go to work for the lobbyists, so they know how to put pressure on people and play that whole game. Whereas in consensus, for instance, in the group that we were working in to create the Community Planet Vision, I remember a couple of times, and this is in the video that you saw on our website too, the same story, but there was a couple of times where we thought we had reached a decision that we thought was a pretty good decision, and we wanted to move on because there was lots more to do. And one of the people in our group, who was very intuitively based and but would not have been a person who usually spoke out in a group, she would just say, when we checked to see if we were in consensus, she would just say, "That's not it." And we would say, "Well, what do you mean that's not it? What's wrong with it?" She couldn't tell us what was wrong with it. So we hoped that when we came back the next week, that maybe she would have changed her mind, but we came back and we said, "Well, let's check for consensus, Ken." She says, you still don't have it. And at that point, we realized we were blocked, and because we have a nice connection with each other, we just started being silly and throwing out absurd ideas. And part of the essence of brainstorming, of course, is to always throw out absurd ideas. And somebody would say something eventually that another of us would build on, and then we'd build on that, and we'd build on that. And we'd get to this whole other level of a decision to describe something much differently than what we were willing to settle for before. And that never happens in political processes where they listen to somebody who's a quiet person, who's intuitively based, who may have, in this case, she didn't even have the answer. All she had was that what we were doing was not what we needed. And fortunately, she had the strength to stick to that position, which caused us to explore at a far deeper level than we were willing to settle for. So these kinds of things are possible in consensus, and political decisions that are made nowadays, they're making decisions that are pretty inadequate and are not usually taking in historically what has to happen so that 10, 20 years down the line, are these decisions still even going to work? Or is this something that we're just willing to settle for now that's a compromise that, doesn't really serve people?
Yeah, that's really beautifully stated, Jack. As I sense into who you are and your energy, you really feel to be operating from your heart. And I sense you probably have been doing that ever since you were a child. I mean, I know you got shut down as a child a lot, but that you have this really deep visionary heart that's just been bursting for a long time. But come on, everybody, don't you get it? And that we do need to remake the world in love, and that means we have to create environments that are safe enough that our hearts can open. And then the intelligence and the knowing that is in our heart, that has access to the whole multiverse, can start to manifest and show up. And that things have to be in place in such a way that we do feel it is a matter of safety at the core. And this, our context society that we're currently in, it's engineered to keep us unsafe and to shut us down, and then to operate from the program, from the ego, that is going to pit one person against the other. And so that the true life force, the true beauty of this essential energy is, in my experience and many others, is being vampirized, is actually being used by the controllers. And it's been engineered this way. But it's candy-coated, it's got the big frosting on it, that it's the coolest and hippest, and we're the safest, and we have the best and the most, and we're the freest, and it's, well, certainly here on Truth Frequency, we are investigating from many different angles the lie of all of that, and we are waking up to the lie of all of that. But the thing is that we have to go beyond seeing the lie of all of that into solution, and that's why I wanted to get you on the show tonight, because you've spent 15 years holding all the pieces of this and diving into it and seeing how it can work. And this is what most of us don't have a clue about. We want it, it's in our hearts, but it almost feels out of reach.
I'm glad you brought up something there that about the loving, because that's one of the things to look for in creating this new paradigm, is look for the loving. When I go places and people are talking about these kinds of things, one of the questions is, are they operating out of that place of loving? because that's really what's needed. I've done interview shows where people will ask at the end, they'll say, well, what is one thing that the listener can do to make a difference? And, we're working on creating that model. So if there's anybody who's interested in that, sure, come and contact us, and let's see how we can work together. But for everybody, the thing would be to start operating with more loving in your life, to start communicating more lovingly with yourself, with other people, to just bring that loving forward, because that's the thing that's going to make a difference, because we're not going to create anything unless we create it out of that loving.
Yeah, absolutely. And I do want we have about 4 more minutes to this hour, and I would like to share your website, your book, how people can get hold of you. I know that the project does need funding, and so however people can connect with you, it would be great for you to tell us now.
Sure. The website is communityplanet.org. All one word, Community Planet, all small letters, communityplanet.org. Go to that website. You can contact us through the website. Watch the video on the website, because it in a thumbnail sketch lays out what the vision is. The book goes into much more detail on it, and there's descriptions of the book, and one can order a book through the website. So that's what I'd advise people to do.
Beautiful. And we are going to have Jack back for a second hour next Friday night, and I really want to dive in further into how you see the problems that we're facing, and more specifically on the facilitation models, the consensus models, and the design, and the 12 parts, and more of the blueprint that you have, because I know that you've spent a very long time working this out in a great deal of depth. So we really only have about a minute and a half left, and I guess I would ask you, if in 1 minute, what would you like to say in closing tonight, Jack? Oh no!
In 1 minute, well, try and look at the world different in terms of when I walk, for instance, here in Santa Barbara, California, which is where I live. When I walk down the street and I look at the things that are there and how people are living, and I imagine how different it could be if people were really living together cooperatively. We can create a completely different world where people are having so much more fun and so much more access to things that they enjoy in their lives, and people to do those things with, as opposed to the isolation and separation, and we can't do
beautiful.
things.
Yes, thank you. That's the show for tonight. Thank you so much, Jack, for holding this beautiful, heartfelt vision for all of us. We sure need it. All right, everybody, my heart to you all. Come back next week, and we'll dive much further into the Community Planet with Jack Reed. Good night.